I won $89 million in the lottery, but didn't tell anyone. My son said, "Mom, when are you finally moving out of our house?" I quietly got up from the table and left. The next morning I bought their dream house, but not for them. Good day, dear listeners. It's Clara again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Margaret Eleanor Briggs, and I was 71 years old the night my son told me I had overstayed my welcome in his home. I want to tell you the whole story from the beginning, because beginnings matter. They explain everything that comes after. I had lived in that house, my son Daniel's house, for 2 years by then. 2 years since my husband Harold passed away from a stroke in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, sitting in his favorite armchair with a crossword puzzle on his lap. We had been married for 46 years. I didn't know who I was without him. After the funeral, Daniel had stood in my kitchen in Tucson, his hands in his pockets, and said, "Mom, you can't stay here alone. Come live with us." I had looked at the walls I'd painted myself, at the garden Harold and I had planted together, at the photographs on the mantelpiece, and I had said yes. I should have asked more questions before I said yes. Daniel's house was in Phoenix, a sprawling 4-bedroom place in a quiet suburb with a pool in the backyard and a 3-car garage. His wife, Renee, had decorated it in what she called modern farmhouse. White walls, shiplap, and throw pillows that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. It was beautiful. It was also not mine. I was given the guest room at the end of the hall. It had a window that faced the neighbor's fence. I was told not to rearrange anything. In those first months, I told myself it was an adjustment. Renee was busy with her real estate business. Daniel worked long hours at his engineering firm. Their 2 children, Caleb, 13, and Sophie, 10, barely acknowledged my presence unless they wanted something. I cooked. I cleaned up after dinners. I helped with homework and drove to school pickups when asked. I folded laundry. I kept quiet. What I didn't say out loud was that I felt invisible. It crept in slowly, the way cold does through an old window frame. You don't notice it until you're already shivering. There was the time Renee had her book club over and introduced me to her friends as Daniel's mother, who's staying with us for a while, as though I were a house guest who had forgotten to leave. There was the Sunday Daniel and Renee took the children to brunch and simply didn't mention it to me. I discovered they'd gone when I came downstairs at 10 in the morning to find the kitchen empty and a note on the counter that said, "Back by noon. There's coffee." There was the budget conversation I accidentally overheard in October of that second year, when Renee's voice floated down the hallway from their bedroom. "She eats our food, uses our utilities, and contributes what, exactly?" I had stood in the hallway for a long moment. Then I walked back to my room and closed the door very quietly behind me. I want to be honest with you, I was not a saint. I questioned myself constantly. Was I too present? Not present enough? Too old-fashioned? Did I take up too much space in a house that wasn't mine? I thought about Harold every single night, about our small house with the yellow kitchen, about how he used to leave cups of tea outside my bathroom door in the morning because he knew I hated speaking before 9 o'clock. I thought about what I had given up to be here, in this white-walled house where I was tolerated. But I stayed. Because he was my son. Because I believed family was family. The lottery ticket was an accident, in a way. I had stopped at the gas station on Route 9 on a Thursday afternoon in February, on my way back from my doctor's appointment. The machine was right there near the register. I bought one ticket, the way I'd done perhaps a dozen times in my life, with no real expectation. I tucked it into my coat pocket and forgot about it for 4 days. I found out I'd won on a Monday morning, sitting alone at the kitchen table with my reading glasses and a cup of instant coffee. I checked the numbers twice, then 3 times. Then I sat very still for a long time, looking at the backyard through the sliding glass door, at the pool that had been covered for winter. $89 million. I did not make a sound. I folded the ticket and slipped it inside my Bible, between the pages of Proverbs, and I said nothing to anyone. That was February. The dinner happened in March. It was a Tuesday, unremarkable in every way. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from a bag. Caleb was on his phone. Sophie was complaining about a girl at school. Daniel was tired from work and eating quickly, the way he always did when he was distracted. Renee was talking about a property she was closing on Friday. I was passing the rolls when Daniel said it. He didn't look up from his plate. His voice wasn't cruel. That was the thing that hurt most about it. It was simply tired, the way you sound when you're saying something you've been thinking for a long time. "Mom," he said, "when are you actually planning to move out? I mean, what's the plan here?" The table went quiet. Renee looked down at her plate. Caleb put his phone on his lap. Sophie stopped mid-sentence. I looked at my son. His hair was going gray at the temples, just like Harold's had. He was 44 years old, and he was looking at me the way you look at a problem you haven't been able to solve. I set down the basket of rolls. I folded my napkin. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "Excuse me," I said, and I walked away from the table. I didn't go to my room. I went outside. The backyard was cold that evening, the pool tarp pooling with the last of the winter rain. I sat in one of the patio chairs that nobody ever used, and I looked up at the sky, which was the dark orange and gray of a Phoenix evening, and I breathed. I was not a woman who cried easily. Harold used to say I had the emotional architecture of a lighthouse, steady in bad weather, light visible from a distance, but not a warm place to be caught in a storm. He said it with affection. I had spent 60 years learning to hold myself upright, but sitting out there in the cold, I let myself feel it. The whole weight of the past 2 years pressed down on me like a hand on my chest. The invisibleness, the staying with us for a while, the budget conversation, the missed brunches. And now Daniel's voice, flat and tired, asking me what my plan was, as if I were a tenant in default. I thought about where I would go. That was the practical question, and it was a frightening one. My house in Tucson, Harold's and mine, had been sold 8 months after I moved to Phoenix. Daniel had been the one to suggest it. "Mom, you're not going back there alone. Keeping it empty is costing you money." He had been right, technically. But I had cried for 3 days after the closing, and no one had asked me why. The sale had left me with $240,000 in savings, plus my Social Security and Harold's small pension. Enough to live on modestly, not enough to buy a home in Phoenix without wiping myself out entirely. Or so I had thought. Sitting in that cold backyard, I ran the numbers in my head for the first time with a different variable. $89 million. After federal taxes on a lump sum. I had already looked this up 2 weeks ago, late at night on my phone. I would receive approximately $52 million. $52 million. The number didn't feel real. It felt like a word in a foreign language. I understood its definition, but it didn't yet carry weight in my body. But it would. I sat outside for over an hour. When I came back in, the kitchen had been cleaned up, and everyone had gone to their separate rooms. There was no knock on my door that night. No, "Mom, are you all right?" No apology. Just silence, which was somehow worse than the question itself. I lay awake until 2 in the morning. And in those dark, quiet hours, I did the most important thinking of my life. The fear came first. That is honest. I was afraid of being alone at 71, truly alone, without family close by. I was afraid of making a mistake with money I had no experience managing. I was afraid of what it would mean to act against my son, to take steps that could never be undone. But then I thought about something Harold used to say. He'd grown up poor, the son of a Kentucky coal miner, and he had watched his parents be taken advantage of their whole lives because they were afraid to ask for what they deserved. "Maggie," he used to say, "fear is useful for about 5 minutes. After that, it's just an excuse." I thought about what I had actually seen over the past 2 years. Not what I'd told myself, not the charitable interpretations, not the "she's busy," and "he's stressed," and "they don't mean it." The actual evidence. Renee discussing my cost-to-benefit ratio to my son. Daniel asking me when I was leaving without a hint of apology in his voice. The way both of them had watched me set down that basket of rolls and leave the table and said nothing, done nothing. I thought about what they would do if they knew about the money, and that thought, clear, cold, and specific, was what crystallized everything. They could not know. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, depending on what happened next. I reached for the notepad I kept on my nightstand, and I began to write. Not a diary entry. A list. Step 1. Speak to no one in this household about the lottery. Not one word. Step 2. Claim the prize privately, through a financial advisor and an attorney before anyone knows. Step 3. Establish financial independence entirely outside of Daniel's awareness. Step 4. Find a home. My home. Not a room at the end of someone else's hallway. I stared at the list for a while. It looked like the plan of someone much colder and more calculating than I thought I was. Then I thought about the rolls, the basket of rolls I had been passing when my son asked me when I was leaving, as though the answer were overdue. I circled step 4. I had spent 46 years building a home with Harold. I had spent 2 years letting myself be made to feel I didn't deserve one. That was over. I didn't know yet exactly what I was going to do with $52 million. But I knew what I was going to do first. I was going to get up, get dressed, and stop pretending that the way I was being treated was acceptable. The next morning, I was awake by 6. I showered, dressed in the gray blazer I saved for important occasions, and came downstairs before anyone else was up. I made coffee. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table, and I opened my laptop. I searched for estate attorneys in Phoenix who specialized in financial privacy. By the time Renee came downstairs at 7:30, heels clicking on the tile, I had 3 appointments booked under my maiden name, Briggs. She looked at me with a vaguely startled expression, as if she'd expected me to still be in my room. "Good morning," I said pleasantly. She poured her coffee and left for the office without another word. I watched her go, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt something other than invisible. I felt like myself. The attorney's name was Patricia Holloway. Pat, she insisted. A sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s who ran a boutique estate practice out of an office in Scottsdale. She came recommended through a financial planning directory, and when I called, her assistant had been businesslike and discreet. That discretion was what I was paying for. I told Daniel I had a doctor's appointment. It was the first lie I had told my son in perhaps 20 years. I sat with that for a moment in the car, then decided I could live with it. Pat Holloway's office was nothing like I expected. It was quiet and comfortable, with good art on the walls and no flat-screen television blaring in the waiting room. When I was shown in, she stood to greet me, looked at me steadily, and said, "Mrs. Briggs, you said on the phone this was sensitive. That means it stays in this room. Tell me what's happened." I told her everything: the lottery ticket, the amount, my living situation, the dinner, my son's question. I laid it out in order, without embellishment, the way I had always done things. Harold had once said I gave information the way a good nurse takes a pulse, steady and accurate. Pat listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "First thing," she said, "have you signed anything? Told anyone at the Lottery Commission your name?" "No, I've told no one." "Good." She pulled a legal pad toward her. "Many states allow lottery winners to claim through a trust or an LLC, which keeps your name out of public record. Arizona is one of them. We'll establish a revocable living trust before you claim. Your name does not appear on any public filing. We also need to talk about a financial advisor. I have two I trust implicitly, and we need to discuss your current living arrangement and how you'd like to proceed." She said all of this calmly, as though helping 71-year-old women secretly manage lottery fortunes was a routine Tuesday. Maybe for her it was. I left her office 2 hours later with a folder of documents to review, a referral to a financial advisor named Charles Nguyen, and the distinct feeling that I had, for the first time in a long time, done something for myself. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved carefully. I met with Charles, who was thorough and patient, and never once made me feel foolish for asking basic questions. We discussed investment structures, tax implications, charitable giving options. The trust was established under the name Eleanor Properties, LLC. My middle name, Harold's mother's name. The lottery was claimed quietly, the funds routed into a private account I had opened at a bank on the other side of the city. I was meticulous about maintaining my routines at home. Same breakfast, same grocery runs, same quiet evenings, same woman they'd always overlooked. But things change when you stop trying to be invisible. It was Renee who noticed first. She had a talent for noticing things that were useful to her. It was what made her a good real estate agent, and, I suspected, a calculating daughter-in-law. She said something to Daniel on a Thursday evening. I heard it from the hallway. Again, not deliberately. The walls in that house were not thick enough for the conversations they had. "She's been going out more." I saw a folder on the kitchen table before she took it to her room. Looked like legal documents. A pause. Then Daniel. "She probably has stuff to sort out. Financial stuff from Dad's estate, maybe." "Harold's estate was settled 2 years ago." Another pause. "I'll ask her," Daniel said. He did ask me the following morning over coffee. Very casually, the way you ask something when you've rehearsed the casual. "Mom, is everything okay? Renee mentioned you've had some appointments. Nothing medical, I hope?" I looked at my son over the rim of my coffee cup. His face was open, concerned, and underneath the concern, something watchful. Something I recognized but didn't want to name yet. "I'm fine, Daniel," I said. "Just some administrative things to get in order. You know how it is at my age. Paperwork never ends." He nodded and let it go. But I noticed that evening, Renee left her laptop open on the kitchen counter in a way that seemed accidental, but wasn't. I noticed, too, that the folder I had left in my room, locked with a small combination lock I'd bought at the pharmacy, had been moved a half-inch to the left. Someone had tried to open it. I sat on my bed and looked at that folder for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't planned to do for another few weeks. I drove to a FedEx office, made certified copies of every document inside, and had them couriered to Pat Holloway's office for secure keeping. And then I drove to a neighborhood I had noticed on one of my drives across the city. A quiet street, older trees, houses with proper yards and front porches. The kind of neighborhood that reminded me of the Tucson street where Harold and I had raised Daniel. I had already been speaking to a real estate agent. Not one who knew Renee, I had been careful about that. A woman named Judy, who worked an area well outside Renee's professional territory. One house in particular had stayed in my mind since the first time Judy had sent me the listing. 4 bedrooms, a sunroom facing east, a yard big enough for a garden, quiet street, good bones. The kind of house that felt like it was waiting. When I got home that evening, Daniel and Renee were sitting in the living room together. They stopped talking when I walked in. Renee looked at me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Margaret," she said. She rarely called me by my name. It was usually Daniel's mom, or nothing at all. "We were just thinking it might be nice to have a family dinner Sunday. All 4 of us. Really catch up." I looked at her. I looked at Daniel. I thought about the folder moved a half-inch to the left. "That sounds lovely," I said, and I went upstairs to call Judy about the house. The offer went in on a Wednesday morning. Full asking price, cash, through the trust. Clean and fast, the way Pat had advised. Judy called me from the car as I was walking back from the neighborhood pharmacy. "Margaret, they accepted. We're in escrow." Her voice had the particular warmth of a professional who genuinely liked her client. 30-day close. Congratulations." I stood on the sidewalk in the February sunshine and let the words settle over me. Mine. I had not felt that word applied to a place since Tucson. The closing was set for the second week of March. I said nothing at home. I continued to be the quiet woman at the end of the hall. I cooked Tuesday dinners and drove Sophie to her violin lesson and smiled at Renee's book club acquaintances if I passed them in the driveway. But the information had legs. Real estate transactions in Arizona are public record. Renee knew this. It was her industry. I would later learn that she had set up an alert on a property data service for my name and, when that produced nothing, had apparently been searching variations. She found it through the trust name after a neighbor, a woman named Carol, who knew both Renee and my real estate agent Judy from a networking group. Mentioned she'd heard Judy was closing a cash deal on Whitmore Lane. Renee was a fast connector of dots. She came to my room on a Saturday morning. She did not knock first. I was at my small writing desk when the door opened, and I will say this for Renee. She did not bother with a warm-up. She closed the door behind her, stood in the center of my room, and said, "You bought a house." I turned from my desk. I was wearing my reading glasses and the cardigan Daniel had given me for Christmas 3 years ago. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who was 41 years old and very beautiful, and very used to getting what she wanted from people. "I've been looking for a place," I said. "Yes. A 4-bedroom house on Whitmore Lane, cash transaction through a trust called Eleanor Properties." She crossed her arms. "Where did the money come from, Margaret?" "I have savings," I said. "Daniel and I discussed your finances after Harold's estate closed. You had enough to live on, not enough to buy a house in this market." I noticed she said, "Daniel and I discussed your finances," as simply as you'd discuss the weather, as though my finances were a matter of household administration. "Things change," I said. Her eyes narrowed. She was doing the math. I watched her do it. "Did you inherit something?" she said. "An account we didn't know about?" I took my reading glasses off and set them on the desk. "Renee," I said, "is there a reason you feel entitled to an accounting of my personal finances?" The temperature in the room dropped. She was quiet for exactly the right amount of time, the silence of someone recalibrating. Then, "We've supported you for 2 years, Margaret. We took you in when you had nowhere to go. I think we deserve some transparency." There it was. Took you in. I had been cooking their dinners and driving their children and making myself small in their home for 2 years, and the ledger in her mind read, "We took her in." "You have been very generous," I said. My voice was steady, "and I am grateful. I'll be out of your home within the month." I turned back to my desk. She did not leave. "If you've come into a significant amount of money," she said, and now her voice had a harder edge, "Daniel is your son. He is your heir. He has a right to know. There are estate considerations, tax implications." "I have an attorney and a financial advisor," I said without turning around, "both very competent." "Margaret," her voice sharpened, "if you are hiding assets and something happens to you, it will create enormous legal complications for this family, for Daniel. You should think about that." I set down my pen. "I have thought about everything very carefully," I said. "Thank you." She left. The door closed, harder than she'd opened it. I sat at my desk and my hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From the effort of holding still when every part of me wanted to stand up and say all the things I had not said in 2 years. Daniel came to my room that evening. He sat on the edge of the bed, the guest bed, the narrow bed, in the room with the window that faced the fence, and he looked at his hands. "Renee's upset," he said. I noticed. "Mom?" He looked up. "Is there something going on that we should know about? Financially, I mean?" He paused. "I know I said some things at dinner that were... I could have put it better. I'm sorry about that. But this feels... Renee says you were evasive, and it's making us worried." Worried? That was the word he chose. I looked at my son. I thought about the 14-year-old who had cried for an hour when our dog Chester died. I thought about the young man who had called from his college dorm to tell me he'd gotten an A on his engineering thesis. I thought about the 44-year-old who had asked me when I was leaving without once looking up from his plate. "You don't need to worry about me," I said quietly. "I am going to be fine." He waited. When I said nothing more, he nodded slowly and left. 3 days later, I drove to Whitmore Lane alone and sat outside the house in my car for 20 minutes. The yard had old oak trees. The porch had a swing. I thought, Harold would have loved this. I drove home and slept better than I had in 2 years. The shift in the atmosphere of that house was noticeable the Monday morning after Daniel's visit to my room. Renee made breakfast. This had not happened since my first week there, 2 years ago, when the welcome was still being performed for an audience. She made French toast and fresh coffee and set a place at the table for me without being asked. She was wearing a cream silk blouse and her good earrings, and she smiled at me with the full warmth of a woman who had decided to change her approach. "Morning, Margaret," she said. "Sit down, it's almost ready." I sat down. Caleb looked up from his phone with a vaguely confused expression, as if he sensed atmospheric pressure had changed. Sophie hummed something under her breath. The breakfast was delicious. I complimented it sincerely because it was sincere. Good food is good food. Over the following week, I was invited to accompany Renee on errands, casually, as if it had always been the custom. Daniel began coming home for dinner more consistently, and he directed conversation toward me, asking about my opinions on things, what I remembered from places he'd traveled, what Harold had thought of this or that. Sophie showed me her violin homework. Caleb, extraordinary boy, 13 and deeply uncommunicative, brought me a bag of the licorice candies I mentioned once, 6 months ago, that I'd loved as a child. It was a well-executed campaign. I recognized it because I had spent 46 years watching Harold negotiate contracts. He was a structural engineer, and the good ones, he always said, knew that the most dangerous moment was when the other party stopped pushing and started smiling. They wanted to know about the money. They wanted to reposition themselves before I left. And if they could make me feel guilty enough, or grateful enough, or loved enough, perhaps I would reconsider the house, the attorney, all of it. I was not cold to them. I want to be clear about that. I was present and pleasant, and I received their attention with grace. I thanked Renee for the breakfast. I talked with Daniel about his father. I ate Caleb's licorice, but I did not tell them anything. The closing on Whitmore Lane was scheduled for Thursday of the following week. The movers, a small, discreet company Pat's office had recommended, were booked for the Saturday after. I was 3 weeks from having a front door with my own key in the lock. It was during this week that I called Dorothy. Dorothy Caldwell and I had been friends since 1987, when our daughters, mine, Caroline, hers, Beth, were in the same second-grade class in Tucson. We had raised children together, buried husbands within 2 years of each other, and kept in contact through phone calls that could last 4 minutes or 4 hours depending on the need. Dorothy still lived in Tucson, in the same house she'd shared with Richard, and she was as sharp as she'd ever been. I drove to a coffee shop on the other side of Phoenix to make the call. I know that sounds dramatic, but the walls in Daniel's house were not thick. She picked up on the second ring. "Maggie, I was just thinking about you." I told her everything. It took 40 minutes. She asked one clarifying question and made no other sounds except, occasionally, the kind of deep exhale that means a person is processing something very large. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You're really doing it," she said. "I am." "Good." Her voice was firm and warm in equal measure. "I'm going to say something, and I want you to hear it. What you're doing is not cold. What you're doing is correct. You gave that family 2 years. You gave them your time and your cooking and your presence and your dignity, and they treated you like a liability. The fact that you didn't blow up the dinner table is more grace than most people would manage." I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't known was held. "I'm a little afraid," I admitted. "Of course you are," she said simply. "Fear means it matters. But Maggie, you've been afraid before and you kept going. That's not new." We talked for another half hour. She offered to come to Phoenix for the move-in weekend, and I said yes before she'd finished the sentence. We made a plan. She would drive up Friday, we would do the final walkthrough of the house together, and she would be there when I carried my boxes through the front door of a home that was mine. When I hung up and sat in the coffee shop for a few minutes before driving back, I noticed that the shaking in my hands, the kind that had started the morning Renee walked into my room, was gone. I had been holding the weight of this alone for weeks. I had not realized how much lighter it was to have one other person on the ground beside me. I drove back to Daniel's house. I made dinner. I passed the rolls. I said very little. But when I went to bed that night, I slept deeply without dreaming. They came together on Wednesday evening, 4 days before the move. I had been in my room after dinner, wrapping the small framed photographs I kept on the windowsill, Harold and me at Yosemite. Caroline's college graduation. A picture of Daniel at age 9, missing 2 front teeth, holding a fish he'd caught at the lake in Colorado. I heard both sets of footsteps in the hall before the knock. Daniel opened the door. Renee stood slightly behind him, which was not her usual position. She tended to enter rooms first. Her arms were at her sides. She looked rehearsed. "Can we come in?" Daniel asked. "Of course," I said. I set down the photograph of the fish. They came in and sat on the edge of the bed, side by side. I took the desk chair, turned to face them. My hands were folded in my lap. The packing box was half full behind me. Renee spoke first. "Margaret, we want to start by saying we're sorry. Both of us. This last year, and especially the dinner, it was wrong. Daniel should never have said that." She looked at my son. "I shouldn't have," he said. He met my eyes, and I could see he meant it, at least partly. "Mom, I don't want you to leave like this. I don't want this to be how things are between us." I waited. "We've been thinking," Renee continued. And here her voice shifted almost imperceptibly, from warm to careful. That maybe everything's happened so fast. You found a house, you're packing, but it doesn't have to be like this. If you need more space here, we can convert the study, or she paused for effect. If you want your own place, we could help you look. Together, as a family. We have contacts in the market. We know the neighborhoods. We could make sure you end up somewhere, safe and close. Safe and close. She wanted to know the neighborhood. She wanted to be part of the transaction. We just feel, Daniel said more quietly, that going through all of this alone, with attorneys we've never met, financial advisors, Mom, that's a lot to manage by yourself. We want to help. We're your family. That's what family is for. I looked at my son, then at Renee. I thought about the folder moved a half-inch to the left. I thought about took you in. I thought about Renee's voice through the bedroom wall. She eats our food, uses our utilities, and contributes what exactly? I thought about the fact that they had sat in this room, on this guest bed, and framed wanting control over my finances as wanting to keep me safe. I appreciate what you're saying, I said. Both of you. Renee's expression became more earnest. She leaned forward slightly. Margaret, if you've come into money, and I think you have, I think something significant has happened. Please don't make decisions in a vacuum. Daniel is your only son. Think about what Harold would have wanted. Think about what this does to your relationship with your grandchildren. Caleb and Sophie love you. There it was, the children. They do love me, I said. And I love them. That's not going to change. Then why are you doing this alone? Her voice had an edge now, carefully wrapped in concern. What has someone told you that made you feel like you need to hide things from us? I looked at her for a long moment. No one told me anything, I said. I watched and I listened and I drew my own conclusions. I've been doing that for 71 years. I'm quite good at it. The warmth in Renee's face shifted. It was a small shift, but I'd been watching her face for 2 years. You're making a mistake, she said. Her voice was flat now, the performance peeled back. Margaret, Daniel put a hand out. Whatever you have, whatever this is, if you're not careful, someone will take advantage of you. People will find out. You'll be a target. We are the people who should be protecting you. Protecting me, I repeated. Yes. I unfolded my hands. I stood up from the desk chair. I was not a large woman, but I had good posture. Harold used to say I had the spine of someone who'd been told her whole life to stand up straight and had believed it. I have a very competent attorney, I said. I have a financial advisor I trust. I have a best friend of 40 years coming to help me move. I have a house on a street with oak trees and a porch swing, and the closing is in 48 hours. I looked at them both. I am not a woman who needs protecting. I am a woman who needed to be treated with dignity. There is a difference. Renee stood up. Her jaw was tight. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said. I can live with that. Daniel looked at me for a long moment. Something moving behind his eyes that I couldn't fully read. Something not quite anger. Maybe the beginning of understanding. Or maybe the anger's quieter cousin. And then he followed his wife out of the room. The door closed. I sat back down. My heart was beating fast. I looked down at the photograph still in my hand, the one of 9-year-old Daniel with the fish. His smile was enormous, the kind children have before they learn to manage their faces. I had loved him so much at 9. I loved him still, which is perhaps the most difficult part of any of this to explain. But love, I had learned, did not require you to make yourself small. I set the photograph in the packing box face up, surrounded by tissue paper. Then I went downstairs, made myself a cup of tea, and sat with it at the kitchen table in the dark for a while. The fear was there. I won't pretend it wasn't. But underneath it, quiet and clean as a current, was something else entirely. I was still standing. I was still myself. And in 48 hours, I would have a key in my hand. The house on Whitmore Lane smelled like old wood and something faintly floral. Previous owners, Judy told me, had kept lavender in the rooms. Dorothy arrived Friday evening and walked through every room with her hands clasped behind her back, the way she always moved through spaces she was assessing. "It's yours," she said at the end of the walkthrough. "I can feel that. It already knows it." I don't know that I believe in houses knowing things, but I believed her. We moved in on Saturday. The movers were efficient and quiet. By afternoon, my boxes were stacked in the rooms where they belonged, and Dorothy and I sat on the porch swing with iced tea while the March light went golden over the oak trees. For the first time in 2 years, I exhaled completely. I had sent Daniel a text the morning of the move. "I've moved out today. The room is cleared and clean. Thank you for the time I was there. I'll be in touch about getting together soon." Brief, civil, true. He did not reply for 6 hours. When he did, it was 3 words. "Are you okay?" I answered. "Yes, very much so." That was Saturday. The gathering happened the following Sunday. Daniel called me Thursday to invite me to a family lunch at his house. His parents-in-law would be there, Renee's sister Tammy, and the children. He presented it as an olive branch, a normalization of things. I had been expecting something like this. I said yes. I called Pat Holloway on Friday morning. I told her what I was walking into. She was quiet for a moment and then said, "Do you want me to prepare anything?" I said yes, and we spoke for an hour. I also called Charles Nguyen, who sent me a summary document I printed and placed in my good leather folder. When I arrived at Daniel's house on Sunday at noon, the table was set for 9, and the house smelled of something in the slow cooker. Renee's parents were there. Gary and Linda, polite, in their late 60s, who had always been kind to me. Tammy, Renee's younger sister, sat next to her husband. The children moved between rooms. It looked warm. It was constructed to look warm. I greeted everyone, accepted a glass of water, and sat in the chair they had placed, deliberately, I noted, in the corner, slightly removed from the table's main axis. The observer's seat. Lunch was served. Conversation moved through weather, the children's activities, a trip Gary and Linda were planning. Renee let it run for approximately 40 minutes before she moved. "I wanted to say something," she began, addressing the table generally, her voice taking on the register of a woman making a considered, reluctant announcement. "I want to say it because I think families should be able to talk about hard things." She looked at me. "We are worried about Margaret." Gary and Linda looked at me with concern. Tammy arranged her face into sympathy. "Margaret has recently made some significant financial decisions, large ones, without consulting any of us. Without consulting Daniel, who is her son and her closest family. We have tried, gently and privately, to understand what's happened, and she has not been forthcoming." Renee paused. "We believe she may have come into a sum of money, and that she is being guided by people she's only recently met, in ways that could be very harmful. We think, as a family, we need to address this together." The table was quiet. I looked at Renee. I looked at Daniel, who was looking at the table. Then I reached down and opened my leather folder. "I appreciate the concern," I said. My voice was level, the way a room is level when all the furniture is in the right place. "Since we're talking about it openly, let me be open." I looked around the table, at Gary and Linda, at Tammy, at the children half listening from the other room. In February of this year, I won the state lottery. The prize, after taxes, was approximately $52 million. I let that sentence exist for a moment. I did not tell anyone in this household because I wanted to understand my situation clearly before making decisions. I retained a licensed estate attorney and a certified financial advisor. I purchased a home. I have done all of this legally, thoughtfully, and with appropriate guidance. The table was completely silent. Renee's expression had gone very still. What I can also tell you, I continued, and now I turned to face her directly, is that 2 weeks before I claimed the prize, I heard a conversation through the walls of the guest room in which I was told I was a financial burden. I can tell you that my personal documents were tampered with in my room. I can tell you that every expression of warmth and concern in this household, in these last few weeks, coincided precisely with the moment it became apparent that I had engaged an attorney and was preparing to leave. I closed the folder. I have not made a single financial decision that harms anyone at this table. My estate is properly managed. My son is provided for in my will according to my wishes, and I am, for the first time in 2 years, living in my own home. Gary cleared his throat. Linda's hand was at her mouth. Renee said, You're being unfair. I am being precise, I said. There is a difference. Daniel looked up. His face was the color of someone who has just understood something they had been avoiding. Mom, he started. I love you, I said, which was true, and which I believe surprised him. I will continue to love you, but I am no longer going to manage my life around the anxiety of people who saw me as a problem to be solved. I looked at him steadily. When you're ready to have a real conversation, not a managed one, I'm on Whitmore Lane. I stood, gathered my folder, said a warm goodbye to Gary and Linda and the children, and left. Outside, in my car, I sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel. Then I started the engine and drove home to my house, where the oak trees were beginning to bud. The next week was quiet in the way things are after a storm has passed through. The air changed, the light different, the landscape rearranged. Pat Holloway called me Monday morning, as we had arranged. How did it go? As expected, I said. Any threats? Mention of legal action? Renee mentioned that my decisions would have consequences for the family. No specific legal language. They'd have very little to work with, Pat said. You are mentally competent, financially independent, represented by counsel, and have made no decisions that disadvantage anyone in any actionable way. The only avenue they might attempt is a competency challenge, and they would need significant medical evidence to pursue that, which they don't have. I asked her to make absolutely certain the asset protection structures were as solid as she'd described. She walked me through it again. The trust, the LLC, the firewall between personal and estate assets. Everything was properly documented and filed. There was nothing to challenge. You should also know, she said, that if you want to ensure Daniel receives less than he might otherwise expect, or nothing at all, that is entirely your right as the grantor of the trust. The law does not require you to leave assets to adult children in Arizona. I thought about that for a moment. I'm not looking to punish him, I said. I'm looking to be fair. Then tell me what fair looks like to you. What fair looked like to me took a full hour to articulate. I would leave Daniel 20% of the estate, enough to be meaningful, not enough to be a windfall that had been extorted by bad behavior. Caroline, my daughter in Oregon, who had called every week for 2 years and sent flowers on my birthday and asked how I was actually doing rather than what I was planning financially, would receive 40%. The remaining 40% would go to a charitable foundation. Harold had always believed in education funding, and I intended to honor that. Renee was not mentioned in the document. She had no legal claim, in any case. Pat drew it up. I signed it on a Wednesday in her Scottsdale office, in a conference room with good art on the walls, with 2 witnesses and a notary. It was a relief. Not a cold one. A true one. The kind that comes from having gotten something right. Daniel called me twice that week. I let the first call go to voicemail. His message was careful and somewhat formal. "Mom, I'd like to talk. I know Sunday was. I know I haven't handled things well. I'd like to do better. Please call me when you're ready." I listened to the message 3 times, then I called him back. I did not invite him to Whitmore Lane, not yet. We talked for 45 minutes on the phone. He did most of the talking. He apologized, genuinely, I believe, in the way that is specific rather than general. He said the dinner had been inexcusable. He said he had allowed Renee to take the lead in the Sunday lunch, and that he regretted it. He said he had been, for a long time, uncomfortable about how things were at home, and that he had handled that discomfort by looking away. I listened without interrupting. At the end, I said, "Daniel, I'm not closing the door, but I need you to understand something. I'm not the woman who sits quietly at the end of the hallway anymore. I'm not the person who can be managed or handled. If you want a relationship with me, it needs to be between equals." A long pause. "Okay," he said, quietly, like something being set down. We made a plan to meet for coffee the following week, just the 2 of us. Renee did not call. Tammy, Renee's sister, sent me a text message 2 days after the lunch that said simply, "I want you to know I thought that was wrong of Renee. I'm sorry you had to deal with that." I thanked her. We have stayed in occasional contact since. Through Judy, I learned that Renee had called to inquire about the Whitmore Lane transaction, who my agent was, what the financing looked like, whether anything in the filing was unusual. Judy told me about the call with careful professionalism and said she had provided no information. "I know the ethics rules," Judy said, "and I know when someone's fishing." Whatever Renee had hoped to find, she found nothing. The house closed cleanly. The trust held. The will was filed. It was done. I planted the first seeds in the back garden on a Saturday morning in late March. Tomatoes, lavender, and the yellow marigolds Harold had always liked. The soil in the yard was good, deep and dark, and the oak trees were fully leafed out by then, throwing long shadows across the grass in the late afternoon. Dorothy came for a weekend in April, and we sat on the porch swing both evenings. She brought a cast-iron pan from her kitchen as a housewarming gift and cooked the best cornbread I had eaten since Harold's mother was alive. "You did it," she said on the second evening. "I did it," I agreed. The porch was quiet except for the neighborhood sounds. A lawnmower somewhere. Children. Birds in the oak trees. The light was the specific amber of an Arizona late afternoon. The kind that makes everything look like it's been painted by someone who understood that ordinary things are worth preserving. I had not been this quiet inside myself in a very long time. Spring moved into summer on Whitmore Lane, and I learned the rhythms of a house that was mine. The east-facing sunroom was extraordinary in the mornings. I moved a small table and chair there within the first week and took to eating breakfast in the early light with a book. It became my favorite hour of the day. Harold, I thought, would have been insufferable about how right he'd been to always advocate for an east-facing room. I told him so, out loud a few times. The house didn't seem to mind. I bought a proper kitchen table, a large oak one from an estate sale, the kind with enough surface area to roll out pie dough and host a dinner and do a puzzle all in the same week. I put Harold's armchair, kept in storage since selling the Tucson house, because I couldn't part with it, in the corner of the living room by the west window, and it looked as though it had always been there. I started a garden that was, in the assessment of my neighbor Frank, ambitious. Frank was 68, a retired school teacher, a widower, and a genuinely gifted grower of things. He came over the first Saturday with seedling starts, and we spent the morning talking about soil and drip irrigation. We have since made a habit of Saturday mornings and occasional dinners. He is good company in the quiet way that suits me. In June, Caroline flew in from Portland. She walked through the house with the expression I recognized from when she was a girl and had been given something she'd hoped for without asking. She sat in the sunroom on the first morning and said, "Mom, this house is you." It was the best review I had ever received. She asked me carefully about the money. Not the amount, not what it meant for her, but whether I was okay, whether the people I'd hired were people I trusted. "Yes," I told her, "completely." She exhaled. "Then that's all I need to know." I had raised that girl right. As for Daniel, I will tell this part as honestly as I have told the rest. We met for coffee in late March, then again in April. The conversations were careful. We were both learning how to talk to each other without the old architecture of resentment and avoidance. It is harder than it sounds, but we were both trying, which is the beginning of something. What I learned over the following months was this. Renee had consulted 2 attorneys about challenging my financial decisions. Both had told her there was nothing to challenge. The effort had been expensive and had produced nothing. Daniel and Renee separated in September, about 6 months after I moved to Whitmore Lane. I did not feel satisfied by this. Whatever Renee had done, she was the mother of my grandchildren. And a family breaking apart is not something I have ever wished for. But I could not pretend it was something I had caused. People's choices have weight. They accumulate. Caleb and Sophie came to Whitmore Lane for the first time in July. I was nervous. But Sophie walked straight to the garden window and announced her approval. And Caleb found Harold's armchair and settled into it for the afternoon, moving only to eat cookies and to ask, with genuine curiosity, whether the oil painting above the fireplace was real. "It's good," he said when I confirmed it was. High praise for Caleb. By August, our Saturday visits had become a regular fixture. Sophie helped in the garden. Caleb borrowed a history of bridges from my shelf and returned it 3 weeks later with careful questions about suspension load calculations. He was interested in engineering, like his father, like Harold. Some things move in straight lines, and some things circle back. I had a life, a real one, full of morning light and good soil, and a neighbor who knew how to grow things and grandchildren who came by choice. I had, at 71, built something that felt entirely like myself. People ask me sometimes, Dorothy asks in her way, whether I regret any of it. I don't. What I learned at 71, in a guest room with a window that faced a fence, is something I should perhaps have learned earlier. Dignity is not given. It is held onto. No one hands you a life that makes you feel like yourself. You build it or you don't. You make the decision or you let someone else make it for you. I had $52 million. But the choice that changed my life had nothing to do with money. It was made at a dinner table the night I folded my napkin and stood up and walked away. The money was a door. Walking away was the key. If someone in your life has been making you feel like a burden, if you have been shrinking yourself to fit a space you were never meant to occupy, I want you to hear this. You are not too old, and it is not too late. What would you have done sitting at that table? I'd love to know. Leave it in the comments, and if this story moved you at all, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for listening. It has meant more than I can say.